You know, one of the nice things that I've discovered after being a content creator for the last year and a couple of months is that there is a nice community of us who share the same passions, precious metals and rare coins. There are quite a few of us who make content for YouTube. And I've gotten to know several other content creators reasonably well, and I appreciate the different perspectives that they bring to the things that I am most passionate about also, precious metals and rare coins. It's neat to see that there's a community of people that have, I think, a lot of respect for each other, and I think we all kind of enjoy the camaraderie of doing what we do. It's kind of a unique experience, and I'm glad to be part of the class of people that have kind of come up through the ranks of YouTube the way that I have and at the same time that I have. I enjoy watching the content they create, and hopefully they enjoy watching the content that I create along with me. This is kind of a fun thing to do, and we appreciate the back and forth, I think, the give and take. But I was fed a video in my feed on YouTube a couple of days ago by a content creator that looked like it was something that I'd be interested in. And originally the title is what caught my eye, and I clicked on this to watch it, and after a few minutes I just kind of laughed out loud. Because this content creator was actually calling his viewers and his subscribers names for the type of silver that they were buying, and if they had this, he was actually kind of going off on them. And at first I thought he was doing it kind of to be funny, and then I realized, oh no, he was being serious. He's really calling his own subscribers names. And then a couple of things occurred to me. The first one was that he was probably one of those people that makes what we call clickbait videos. He's just decided that he wants to make content that makes people click on it. Because of that, I'm not going to give him the oxygen that he probably strives to get by making these videos. And the other thing that occurred to me is that he's just kind of ignorant. He clearly doesn't understand what it is that he's talking about. And, you know, after having done this for as long as I have, you encounter people like that sometimes, and normally you just kind of shake your head and let them do what they're going to do. But I thought I'd at least make some kind of a rebuttal video. So if you are new to the channel, my name is Dubsy, and I thank you very much for being with me here today. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, I would love to have you subscribe, become part of this community along with me and all the other content creators who make these types of videos. If you're one of my fellow content creators, I want to give you a special thank you for being with me here again. It is nice to kind of find a community of people that share a like interest with you. That's really kind of neat. So thank you guys and gals for being with me here again today if you're watching this video. I like to begin each of my videos with a simple disclaimer, and that disclaimer is that I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not trying to offer any kind of financial advice. I'm simply trying to share some of my experience having bought and sold precious metals for the last 30 or 40 years, in some of these cases approaching closer to 50 years. And I also like to begin my videos where I can with a couple of definitions, and this entire video is entitled "Junk Silver is Not Stupid," and the concept of this video are all the different positive attributes of what some people call junk silver. I prefer to call it 90% silver, and we'll get into those definitions. That's why I wanted to bring it up. What is 90%? It's something that I forget a little bit easily, probably too easily, that not everybody who's been doing this for as long as I have kind of has these definitions down at heart. So if you are new to the idea of stacking precious metals, there's nothing wrong with it. Everybody has to start somewhere, and I'm really glad that you're starting your journey with me. I think that's really kind of cool. 90% is simply the alloy of 90% silver, 10% copper. That has been our silver standard here in the United States. That's what we made our circulating silver coins out of from essentially the founding of our country in the 1700s up and through 1964. By the early 1960s, we realized that the amount of silver contained in our subsidiary coinage, that's the dimes, the quarters, and the half dollars, the value of that silver had eclipsed the face value on those coins, so we made a determination that we were going to start making our dimes, our quarters, and eventually our half dollars out of a nickel copper clad form of metal that we call simply clad. That's kind of the definition between the two. But before we started making clad coinage, our circulating coins were made out of 90% silver, our dimes, our quarters, our half dollars. Why would we have 90% pure silver rather than 99.9% pure silver? As you see this selection of silver bars here, all 99.9% pure silver. These American Silver Eagles, also 99.9% pure silver. We did that for a couple of different reasons, but the main one is probably the durability of the metal. I'm fond of the expression that coins are some of the hardest working machines that human beings ever invented. And I believe that's true. If you think about circulating coins, they get knocked around and bashed around. But imagine back when gold and silver were actually forms of wealth, and the only real portable forms of wealth that they were. If you had money, it meant that you had gold and silver. It wasn't paper money. It certainly wasn't electronic money, Venmo or electronic checking accounts. Gold and silver were the way that you had your wealth for the most part. And because of that, those coins tended to circulate. It was all part of commerce. And when coins get put into circulation, they get bashed around and beaten up pretty heavily. Gold and silver are pretty soft metals. They're soft elements. Now, they're not as soft as some TV shows and cartoons make them out to be. If you've ever seen one of those westerns where somebody flips a silver dollar to the bartender and the bartender bites it to see if it's authentic. He's not biting it to see if it's real silver. That would bust your teeth right out. There is some speculation that people made fake coins out of lead, which is a very soft metal. Maybe they plated them with silver back in the day. And if you could bite into that, that was a pretty good indication that that was a lead coin and not worth taking. But even if you had a pure silver coin and you tried to bite into it, you might scratch it a little bit, but you'd damage your teeth more, and that's the same thing with gold. The thing is that really fine details get worn away very easily on circulating coinage. We call that, the terminology there is peening, P-E-E-N-I-N-G. And it's just the fact that really fine details wear away really quickly. And governments decided a long time ago that they didn't want their coins to wear down too much, because that reduces the amount of precious metals in them. But more importantly, it makes people think that maybe that currency, and I'll use the word currency to indicate both paper money and coins in this video, that currency was not acceptable if it got damaged too easily. If it was worn down, people would lose faith in their currency, and governments didn't want them to do that. That would put a halt to commerce and everything else. So it was incumbent upon them to make these circulating pieces of precious metals more difficult to wear down, and that's really why they alloyed the silver with 10% copper in this case, though that's 90%. There are different words for 90%. I grew up using the expression 90%, so that's what I'm going to call it in this video. Some people call it junk silver, but when I'm looking at things like these rolls of beautiful uncirculated Franklin half dollars, this would still be considered 90% in most circles, but it certainly isn't junk, so I've never really liked that term junk. I think it's just got negative connotations that aren't necessary. Some people also have recently started calling it constitutional. I don't really like that expression. For one, I think it's kind of cumbersome. That's a lot of syllables when 90% works just as well, and I'm used to using 90%. I have for decades now. I also don't think that constitutional really means what people think it does, and I can put out videos talking about the term constitutional and how it applies if people are interested, but for me, it's simply 90%. That's just what I call it, and that's what I'll call it in this video. So, silver coins that were made essentially in the 20th century. We're talking about Roosevelt silver dimes. Sometimes you might talk about Mercury dimes, winged Liberty dimes that came before them. Generally speaking, we're talking about Washington quarters, and that's because they've been made since 1932. Before that, we had a short run of standing Liberty quarters, and sometimes people have those in their 90% silver stacks also. And for the most part, when we're talking about half dollars, we're talking about sometimes walking Liberty half dollars, sometimes Franklin half dollars, like these rolls that you see here, and sometimes we have rolls of Kennedy half dollars. These Kennedy half dollars, 90% only made in 1964, if I can get the lid off. After that, we had a short run of 40% silver Kennedy half dollars. I won't really be talking about these, but the 90% 1964s were made in such large quantities and pulled out of circulation almost immediately that you can still find those rolls in really nice condition. We might call those AU, BU, sometimes they're called sliders. So that's what 90% silver is. It just is the shorthand way of saying those coins that circulated from essentially 1900 through about 1964, give or take. That's kind of what we're talking about. And let me be clear before I really get into the meat of this video. When I start talking about 90% silver, if you've seen my channel before, you know that I'm a collector of vintage silver bars. I've got a pretty deep collection of 10-ounce silver bars and some that are a little bit smaller than that as well. What we see here is a really nice selection of 1980s, 1990s Johnson Matthey and Engelhard silver bars. These were bars that were popular in that period of time. I collect those bars also. These and their original vinyl holders, I think that those are kind of neat, so I've always collected those. And I also have several rolls of Silver Eagles. These are the American 1 troy ounce silver bullion vehicle in 999 silver. So when I'm talking about 90% and I'm talking about the positive attributes of 90%, I want to make it clear that I don't recommend just having nothing but 90% if you're going to hold physical precious metals, especially silver. I think there is a place for 90%. There's a place for 10-ounce bars and larger bars of 999 silver, and I think there's a place for 1 troy ounce 999 silver coins as well. But I think that 90% has some unique attributes. I'll talk about those. It just so happens that about 15 years ago, really probably closer to 17 years ago, I had been engaged in a series of online discussions, let's call them that. They weren't quite arguments, they never got to that point, where I had kind of suggested that 90% actually does have some pretty interesting positive attributes. And there are a lot of purists out there who felt that they wanted nothing but 999 silver bars or 999 pure silver coins. They didn't want 90%. And at the time that I was writing this, that was definitely the case, because I was able to go to some of my local stores and able to pick up these beautiful rolls of uncirculated coins for literally a couple of dollars per roll over their silver melt value. They were kind of persona non grata. People didn't want them. They wanted 99.9% pure things. And I think maybe that's shifted a little bit. Some people are kind of stuck in that 99.9% phase. Some people like 90%. There's really nothing wrong with either of them. Clearly, I've got examples of all of those here, and I think that it makes kind of an interesting three-legged stool, if you want to think of it that way, for things to have in your precious metals holdings. But the more I had these online discussions with people, I would jot down the ideas that we were talking about. And it eventually got to a point where I had 8 or 10 concepts that I thought were really interesting about 90% that didn't apply to some of the other precious metals, physical precious metals out there. So I wrote what became kind of a treatise, just a short document, an argumentation where I listed all of these features, and I published it online. And lo and behold, they say that people will take your ideas and run with them, or that imitation is the most sincere form of flattery. I started seeing my own treatise cut and pasted and posted in other forums. And it's not like I think that I'm the first person to think of these, but I was maybe the first person to kind of collect them all and write them down. So I don't mind other people talking about them. I certainly, like I said, I wasn't the one who created this idea, but I think I am the person that actually got these together. So if you've heard some of these before, there's a chance that they came from me 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Let's just go over the list. These are the attributes that I think are the most interesting things about 90% junk constitutional silver, and why junk silver is not stupid, why it's something that you should consider having in your physical precious metal stack. They are recognition, divisibility, purity, face value, numismatic potential, a low premium, a low minimum investment, and trustworthiness. Now, there are lots of other arguments that you can throw at them, both pro and a con, when it comes to 90%. But I think that these are really the most representative arguments. And let me just talk about all of them as we go through this list. Keep a running track in your mind, and if you've got contradictions for any of these, feel free to leave a comment down below. I like that exchange of ideas. I like keeping that flow of information open, and I'm certainly not going to call you names for having an opinion about a vehicle of precious metals. So let's just get into it. Recognition is the first one. Everybody in America knows what a silver quarter looks like, or a Washington quarter at least, right? Everybody in America knows what a Roosevelt dime looks like. We've used these pieces of coinage for decades, from the 1940s to the 1930s when they were first introduced, all the way up until the present time, we continue to make dimes and quarters that look like our precious metal versions that came out in the 1960s and before. So we've got that recognition. Now, if you had a silver panda, or even a silver eagle, for example, and you showed it to a group of people in a park on a summer afternoon, what percentage of them would know what that panda or that silver eagle was? Back when I wrote this especially, I would say it was quite low, and it may have increased a little bit due to some of the larger outlets that are selling silver eagles like Costco, and I've done a series of videos on Costco precious metals recently. But for the most part, I would think you would probably find fewer than 50% of people who would recognize what they are, but they would immediately recognize what a dime and a quarter is, and a lot of them would probably still recognize what a Kennedy half dollar was. So you've got that recognition, but more than just the recognition of your fellow Americans, assuming that you are like me, an American. Many countries around the world over the last 50 years or so used American currency as their primary currency. Remember, I'm using currency, both paper money and coins in this expression. Those countries, a lot of them, continue to use American currency. I think there's something like 12 countries right now that use exclusively American currency, but there were more in the past. What does that tell us? Well, there are about 8 billion people in the world, and I think that probably 1 billion or 2 became familiar with American currency over that period of time. And it's also a function of being shown in TV shows or movies around the world. People just became familiar with our coins and currency. That recognition can't be overstated. That is a very important attribute. If you were to show those people, those same people in that park, a bar from JM or a modern bar from Silvertown or Scottsdale, are they going to know what it is? Are they going to recognize what it is? Have they ever seen one before? Probably not. So if you've got literally billions of people on the planet who recognize what 90% at least has the potential of being, half of your work is already done. That's a very, very important attribute, and it is exclusive to 90%. When you're thinking about modern silver bullion vehicles, think about that. Recognition, not just in the United States, but around the world. The next step is divisibility. And by divisibility, I did a video not too long ago also about these. This is a roll of 1/10 ounce Britannias, silver Britannias. My dealer got these and sold them to me at a low premium. I checked before I started shooting this video. With silver somewhere in that $30 per ounce range, a 1/10 silver Britannia has about $3 worth of silver in it. These are selling on eBay for $10 or $11 a piece. The premium on those is literally double what the value of the silver is. And that seems very comical to me. I almost didn't buy them because they seemed so ridiculous. But if you look at it in the context of 90%, you already have evenly divided pieces that go along with the system. They're kind of baked in, built in, if you will. A dime is exactly 1/10 of a dollar. There are 2.5 times the amount of silver in a silver quarter than there are silver dimes. There is twice the amount of silver in a half dollar than there is in a quarter. So you already have that 1/10, that quarter, and that half unit baked into the system that represents the larger silver dollar, if you will. That's the main currency. These subsidiary pieces that support the silver dollar are already divided into very easy to understand increments. I am not part of the prepper community. I know that there are lots of people who stack precious metals who are. While I'm not part of that community, I do at least understand the concepts that those people are concerned with. And frankly, the idea of being prepared is not a bad idea. But if ever there was a case to consider having divisible pieces that you could use in trade, all you have to do is look at the headlines and see places like Venezuela in the last 5 years and Zimbabwe going back probably about 10 or 15 years. These people have clamored for precious metals, primarily gold, but also silver, because inflation and hyperinflation is so rampant that the only way they can preserve their wealth is through precious metals. And when it comes time to exchange those precious metals for something that you need in regular daily life, if all you have is, for example, 10-ounce silver bars, what are you going to do? You literally have to cut a chunk off of that 10-ounce silver bar. And then you have to convince the person that you're trying to do trade with, whatever that business is, that your silver is 99.9% pure, or whatever the purity is that you're expecting it to be. but also that the weight is exactly the weight that it's supposed to be in order to transact your business. And the problem with that is, even if you are able to convince the first person, are they going to be able to convince the person that they are dealing with? That is actually why coins came about in the first place. So they would already be these incremental, easily divided pieces that represent a whole. You've already got a tenth, you've already got a quarter, you've already got a half. It makes it that much easier. That divisibility is really important to certain segments of stacking. But I also find it to be beneficial in some of the later things that we're going to talk about. Remind me about it if I don't hit on that again. And while we're at the idea of divisibility, if you're talking about eventually getting to a point when you want to sell your precious metals, being able to sell very tiny increments, especially if you're not paying much of a premium for them in the first place, can also be beneficial. That means you're selling exactly the amount that you need to sell and nothing more. And that works really well into things like dollar cost averaging. We'll talk about that again a little bit later. Divisibility, one of the most interesting attributes of 90% that just doesn't exist with a lot of these other silver bullion vehicles. The next one is purity. We've already talked about the fact that these are 90% pure, 10% copper. Some people like the fact that they've got 10% copper because copper is becoming more valuable, and you're kind of getting the copper in these for free, right? This is not something that you're paying for the copper on. It's possible that eventually that copper will have some significant value as well, but I'm not even focusing on that. I'm thinking about purity in terms of that 90% silver. You know, the United States government assays and hallmarks, if you will, these pieces with their own name on it. So there is no question about who made these pieces. You know, it says very easy to see, United States of America right here. We know that these pieces are hallmarked by one of the largest assayers and coiners that has ever existed in the history of the world. The United States Mint puts out literally hundreds of millions of coins every year and has for many decades. And I've been doing this for 30, 40 plus years. And in that period of time, I have never once even heard a discussion that 90% silver is not the purity that it's supposed to be. Have you ever heard that said? Have you ever heard somebody say that this 90% Washington quarter is 85% pure? No, it's just never even come up in conversation. Think about that. For hundreds of millions and probably even billions of coins traded nonstop around the world for the last several decades, you never hear somebody questioning the purity of United States silver circulating coinage. That is a phenomenally important thing to remember. You don't have to worry about assaying something. You don't ever have to worry about it because it is what it's supposed to be. That purity is baked in. And that's a pretty neat feature also. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the next feature, and that is a face value. Because these are circulating coins, at least they were, back in 1964 and before. Each one of these has a face value. That is not true of 999 silver bullion bars. It's not true of 99.9% pure silver rounds that are made privately. It is true of eagles, but there are certain factors with 90% that face value actually is a benefit, and we'll just dive into that really quickly here. When I was writing this treatise, silver was somewhere in that $4, $5, or $6 an ounce range. Believe it or not, that's the truth. And there was some talk about people abandoning silver completely. They just thought going down and down and down further and further, and it was never going to recover. Fortunately, that allowed me to buy the pieces that you see here before you at a really nice price. And I'm glad I did. But more importantly, if ever silver dropped to a point below the face value on these coins, you could simply spend these coins for their face value. That's a really neat safety net. It may not be important now. It may not be important with silver at $30 an ounce, give or take. But it's there. And most other forms of bullion don't have that built-in safety net. It doesn't cost you anything. It just guarantees you that your silver can never drop below a certain value. And if it does, you simply spend it. It's money. It's legal tender. It has been for 170 years, and it probably will continue to be for as long as America is a country. So face value, an important thing to consider. Also consider that counterfeiters are a lot less likely to make fake American currency when they have easier targets, and we'll talk about that a little bit later as well. The next one is the next idea that I wanted to at least suggest to you is numismatic value. And in this expression, I'm also talking about kind of collector value. That kind of is the same thing as numismatics. Numismatics is specifically coins, but hear me out here. Not every one of these pieces and not all the time in every condition is going to have that numismatic potential. But if they're purchased correctly, when you get beautiful, brilliant uncirculated rolls of obsolete coins, you have at least the potential that these pieces are going to gain in value numismatically. Is that true of a modern produced silver bar? It might be true of these bars because these bars are 30 or 40 years old now too. But I gave the examples of those Scottsdale silver bars or Silvertown silver bars. They made those bars last month. They made those bars this week. They will make those bars tomorrow and they'll make them next month. They will continue to make those. And the same thing is true of the Silver Eagles. They may not have the same date on them, but they are going to continue to crank these out. And the United States government releases tens of millions of these some years. That's not the case with 90%. They stopped making 90% silver circulating coinage back in 1964. Look at that. This is 2024. This is the 60th anniversary of the very last examples of these that will ever exist. Every single day, more and more 99.9% silver bars and silver eagles and silver maples and silver libertads get created. So that is an ever-expanding supply of these pieces. And every single day that passes, through attrition and other means, the supply of 90% circulating coinage gets smaller, and it will never be made again. 60 years ago is a long time. I mention all the time that Hunt Brothers run up back in the early 80s when we first saw silver shoot up in price. It got all the way up to about $50 an ounce. And at that period of time, everything that wasn't nailed down was melted. Why? Why were they melting down silver coins that were perfectly good? It's a great question, and that's because when silver goes up in value like that, and silver is traded on a global commodities through the Chicago Board of Exchange and through the London Bullion Market Association and lots of other exchanges around the world, those contracts are written on LBMA bars, sometimes called other names, but those are 1,000 troy ounce bars. Those are massive 1,000 troy ounce bars. They're nominally 1,000 troy ounces. It's very hard to pour exactly 1,000 troy ounces. Those bars, I think, usually weigh between 950 troy ounces and 1,100 troy ounces, but they must be 99.9% pure in order to qualify for these contracts that are traded. So the paper contracts are based on these 1,000 troy ounce bars. And actually, a paper contract for silver is, generally speaking, 5,000 troy ounces at a minimum. So every one of these contracts that's selling on the Chicago Board of Exchange or wherever else in the world that they're being traded is for 5,000 troy ounces, 5 of those massive 999 silver bars. So silver 90% like this doesn't even come into the equation. They can't do anything with it. When the silver runs up in value and they're making these big trades online with these paper contracts, they have to satisfy those contracts with 99.9% pure massive silver bars. And because of that, there is no room to handle 90%. There's no room to handle silver candlesticks or anything else. All of it goes into the crucible, all of it gets melted down, and all of it gets turned into these 1,000 troy ounce bars. And because of that, and it still happens to this day, I've heard anecdotally that a lot of dealers who get 90%, especially if they get it in bits and pieces, don't really have the capacity to sit on it until they accumulate enough to make a roll or a bag, whatever it is that they're trying to. So consequently, they just ship it off to their smelters along with everything else that they get melted down. This is a finite supply of 90% coinage that is shrinking every single day, while everything else that's made out of silver is produced in larger quantities every day. That's an interesting dichotomy, and it's definitely the case. Think about that. A declining supply. So there is the potential for numismatic value. Look for those really nice quality pieces and keep them in very good condition. And there is every reason to believe that over time they will increase in value numismatically, while a generic silver bar by Silvertown or one of the other manufacturers now has very little potential for increasing in value that way. How about a low premium? When I first wrote this treatise, that was definitely the case. Silver bars had a higher premium. Silver vehicles like the Eagle and the Maple definitely had those higher premiums. And boy, if you lived through the beginnings of COVID in the last couple of years, you definitely saw those premiums on the 99.9% 1 troy ounce silver bullion vehicles skyrocket, right? It went to the moon. Sometimes those premiums were very close to the value of the silver contained within them too. So these kind of ebb and flow a little bit, but if you do some due diligence, if you do some shopping, I do believe that you will find cases where you can find 90% at very low premiums, not all the time. But do some shopping, see if it's something that you can look at over time. And there's a good chance that you might find a local dealer who doesn't really like having 90% and will sell it to you very close to its melt value. If that's the case, snap it up when you can. That's my advice. And that goes hand in hand with the fact that these vehicles have a low minimum investment. Investment dealers, investment brokers might call those different things, but it's really that low barrier to acquire is probably what they would say. And by that I mean, I did a video a couple days ago where I found a handful of change in a Coinstar return slot, took it to a local dealer, used that to buy a silver dime. Wish that I'd found a silver dime in that Coinstar slot. That silver dime cost me $2.15. So that's the lowest amount that you're going to have to pay for one of these pieces of 90% silver based on what silver is trading for right now. $2.15. Can you think of another investment vehicle or wealth preservation vehicle that costs $2.15? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. If you're looking at Silver Eagles, those are $30 if silver's $30 an ounce, $30 plus $3, $4, $5, $6 in premium on top of it, $35 maybe, somewhere in that region, $2.15. Isn't that amazing? If you are on a budget, if you're stacking on a budget, if you are just starting out in this particular field of stacking, if you're new to the idea of coins and 90% silver, if you are a young person who's just getting started, if you're a teenager, and you just don't have a lot of money, can you come up with $2, $3, or $4 a week to put into a precious metals vehicle? A couple silver dimes a week over the course of the year will give you 100 silver dimes, if not more, over the course of that year. 100 silver dimes is nothing to sneeze at. That's a great way to start a stack, to see if it's something that you want to pursue. It's very easy to dollar cost average into something that only cost a couple bucks. And I challenge you to find another investment vehicle in any field other than penny stocks, maybe, that cost $2.15 out the door, right? That's literally your out-of-pocket expense. That's a really low barrier to becoming an investor in precious metals, and I think that can't be overstated either. Certainly lower than it would be for a 10-ounce bar of silver or Silver Eagle. And then finally, all of this kind of works into the final concept, which is trustworthiness. There is a lot of give and take right now online through sources like YouTube where people talk about counterfeit gold and silver. I've made several videos about it where I touch on those subjects as well. When was the last time you saw a counterfeit silver dime? A 90% Roosevelt? They're out there, right? You have to dig really hard to find them, though. They're not something that you're going to find very easily. And one of the great things about silver dimes like these is that a silver dime has the look of our circulating silver, or our circulating non-silver dimes. This is a clad dime here on the right. This is a silver dime here on the left. They look really similar, right? That's a great thing. The reason that you see this raised edge around the outside, the reason why you have letters that go all the way to the outside, these letters and numbers here at the bottom all the way on the outside, the reason that when you take one of these and look at the edge, you can see those reeds, those little lines. Let me see how close I can get. There we go. All of these things have been added to coins over the last several hundred years to make them more difficult to counterfeit. You can't shave any metal off of it without it going unnoticed. That's what those reeds are for in the first place. But if you're a coin roll hunter, you know that if you're looking at the edge of those coins, and the one on the bottom here is the clad one, you can see that copper layer, right? That orange copper. You don't see that with the silver. It's easy to figure out which one of these is a silver dime and which one of them is a clad dime. But more important, like I said, counterfeiters don't really counterfeit silver dimes. They don't really counterfeit silver quarters. They might make exceptions for those really highly collectible ones. But just typical 90% silver, it's not worth their time. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier about the fact that the Secret Service takes a very difficult position when it comes to counterfeiting American currency. They don't like it. They go after it with a vengeance, guns blazing. So if you try to counterfeit American currency, they're going to come after you. If you try to counterfeit a Chinese silver dollar from 1916, they probably don't really care. If you're at a flea market and you see an 8 reale from the 1850s from Mexico and you can't quite tell if it's base metal or real, there's a reason for that. Those counterfeiters go after the things that are the lowest hanging fruit, right? They know they're breaking the law. They don't want to bring the law down on them. And that's going to happen if they counterfeit American coinage. But also we have that recognition. We're used to seeing those Washington quarters. We're used to seeing those Roosevelt dimes. We can tell when something is off by looking at those. And that is part of that trustworthiness that I was talking about. That's really what this all builds up to. Some of the least valuable things for counterfeiters to fake, some of the least profitable, and some of the most dangerous things for them to fake are 90% silver coins. So if you're worried about that, this is definitely something that you should look at. Counterfeit silver bars, they are out there. Counterfeit 100-ounce silver bars, definitely been drilled and filled. You're not going to drill and fill a 90% dime or a 90% silver quarter. It just doesn't make any sense. So if you're worried about things like counterfeiting, if you're worried about getting the full measure of your precious metals in your precious metals vehicles, if you don't want to have something that is that low-hanging fruit that the bad guys can go after, 90% deserves some of your attention as well. So these are all the reasons that I think that 90% silver, junk silver, if that's what you want to call it, is not stupid. This actually is a really good idea if you like any of those ideas that I just expressed to you. And again, if you have ideas that you want to use to counter those, I'm willing to listen to them. I like that kind of give and take when we're talking about precious metals. It's something that I'm passionate about, something I enjoy hearing about. But I think you'll have a hard time countering most of those things. And again, I'm not saying just be exclusive with 90%. You can see that I've got 999 silver bars. You can see that I've got 999 silver coins, especially those 1 troy ounce coins. But I do have a fair amount of my precious metals in 90%, and I think it's a really interesting idea with lots of positive attributes. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, I'd like to encourage you once again, go ahead and subscribe. I would love to have you be part of this community, and I'm never going to make derogatory comments about you for deciding that you want to have a particular type of precious metal, with a few exceptions. If you have questions about any of the things that we talked about here, by all means leave a question down below, whether it's about the actual coins themselves, the bars, the coins, or if it's any of the topics that I just talked about. Leave a comment down below. I like to say that if you've got a question about something, somebody else probably does too. Let's see if we can answer it for everybody. If you haven't watched some of my compatriots who also make videos on YouTube for precious metals and rare coins, I encourage you to dig deeper into it. You'll find lots of really interesting content from lots of really interesting people out here who are passionate about precious metals and rare coins. And if you are one of those content creators, once again, I want to thank you for spending some time with me and for encouraging me to continue to make the videos that I make. Your attention, your consideration means a lot to me, and I'm really fortunate that you include me among the groups of people that make the videos that you like. And as always, I want to thank you for allowing me to be a part of your journey as we go deeper into the world of coins and physical precious metals.